Sunak and many others have been issued with fines for breaches of COVID-19 regulations. Our political correspondent, there he is. Tom Harwood joins us live now from outside that bit of the wall between number 10 and number 11. It's not often that both get hit on the same day.
It certainly isn't a significant development in the partygate row today. What we have seen, of course, is that several weeks ago what happened was senior civil servants and indeed some staff, some advisors, political advisors in the buildings behind me and indeed in Whitehall as well received the first 20 fixed penalty notices. And today, a further 30 plus, this time hitting elected representatives, hitting the Prime Minister, hitting the Chancellor and hitting the Prime Minister's wife. Certainly a different order of magnitude of story than when those first notices came about. But what's very interesting following what's happened just over the course of the last hour and a half or so is as much as what isn't being said as what is being said. Of course, we've heard comments from the Labour Party, from the Liberal Democrats, from other parties, from opposition MPs calling on the Prime Minister to resign. What we haven't heard, however, is many Conservative MPs calling for the same. As I speak at this precise moment, not a single fresh Conservative backbench voice calling for the Prime Minister to resign. It feels like there's a different temperature in Westminster now compared to several months ago. But interestingly, on the other side of things, we are yet to hear a Cabinet Minister make a statement in support of the Prime Minister either. What we are hearing at the moment is relative silence from the Conservative Party. Yes, some voices saying now is not the time. Indeed, some voices who were calling for the Prime Minister to go several months ago now saying now is not the time in the context of the Ukraine crisis, of course. However, the overwhelming response from the Conservative Party at this moment in time is silence. The Prime Minister, as I speak, is actually not in the building behind me. He's off at Chequers, having returned from Kiev just a day or so ago with that famous and indeed fairly brave walk around of the capital with President Zelensky, of course. Well, the Prime Minister is taking a day or two of rest with his family in Chequers. Indeed, of course, it's Easter this weekend. Parliament is in recess. And so ultimately what we are seeing is potentially less of the crucible of heat that was occurring when Parliament was sitting several months ago. And of course, Parliament doesn't return until midway through next week. So will the temperature rise when MPs start to coalesce, when those conversations in the corridors of power take place? Potentially. But for now, it seems like there is more of a lull than there was before.
Part of the reason for that, I'm sure, and we've both been through similar, though perhaps not quite as dramatic events as these over the years, Tom, is that both in number 10 and in number 11, they will be doing war games. They'll be working out what the best reaction might be strategically. In your view, with Angela Rayner saying that the PM has blown it and has lost his cover, and Sir Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, already saying the country cannot be run by a criminal, have they shot their bolts early?
I think that it's hard for opposition politicians to have shot their bolts early because ultimately this is what they were saying several months ago. Potentially what happened was the Labour Party demanded the resignation of the Prime Minister too soon, before the full Sue Gray report, indeed before that first fine that we now know has been demanded today by the Metropolitan Police. So potentially, if the Labour Party might have waited until this moment in time to demand for a resignation, we may well have seen a greater fever, a greater temperature. But yes, it does seem to be the case that the more opposition politicians demand the same thing, the less power potentially those demands now have. I suppose what happens now is we need to wait for this Metropolitan Police investigation to conclude. It's not over yet. Indeed, there may well be more fines coming down the line. There may well be more fines that affect senior individuals, senior politicians, senior civil servants, senior advisors, both in the building behind me and, of course, in the events in Whitehall that were being investigated as well. The Metropolitan Police currently saying they have not concluded their investigation, and only at the point at which they do conclude that investigation will Sue Gray's final report be able to be published. And once that's published, at that point in time, the Prime Minister has promised to come to the Commons to address everything that has been revealed out in the open once and for all. Potentially that is a crunch point that may well raise the temperature further. The other crunch point, of course, that the people in the buildings behind me will be considering in great detail is several weeks from now, the 5th of May, those local elections where communities right across England go to vote in various different localities, potentially most notably in London, where there are some big defences the Conservatives have to hold up. Will they hold Wandsworth Council? Will they hold Westminster Council? There are some big questions over those key swing areas. And indeed, if there's a drubbing for the Conservative Party on the 5th of May, if we find out going into the morning of the 6th of May, that Friday, if we have revealed a big rejection of the Conservative Party by the people of this country, well, potentially this political situation then gets more tricky. Potentially then the cover that is in effect given by international events and the serious nature of what is going on overseas, and indeed the warm reception the Prime Minister is receiving overseas, potentially that fades away.
Tom, stay exactly where you are for those